Marcus Thompson walked through the gates of Buckingham Palace with his chest puffed out like a peacock. The 28-year-old American tourist had been planning this London trip for months, and today was supposed to be the highlight of his vacation. He wore his best suit, the expensive one his mother had bought him for job interviews, and carried a professional camera around his neck that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Marcus had always been the type of person who believed the world owed him something special. Back home in Dallas, Texas, he worked as a mid-level manager at his father's construction company, a job he had gotten not through merit, but through family connections. He drove a flashy red sports car, lived in an apartment his parents helped pay for, and constantly bragged to anyone who would listen about his supposed accomplishments and connections. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Marcus approached the famous red-coated guards standing at their posts. He had seen countless movies and television shows featuring these iconic soldiers, and in his mind he had built up a fantasy about how this encounter would go. He imagined himself as some kind of important dignitary who deserved recognition and respect from these representatives of the British monarchy. As he got closer to the nearest guard, Marcus pulled out his expensive smartphone and opened his social media app. He had over 3,000 followers on his Instagram account, mostly friends from college and co-workers who tolerated his constant posting about his supposedly glamorous lifestyle. Today, he planned to post something that would make all of them jealous and prove once and for all that he was living a life worth envying. The guard stood perfectly still, his tall black hat creating an imposing silhouette against the morning sky. His red uniform was immaculate, every button polished to perfection, and his rifle held at exactly the right angle. This was Guardsman James Mitchell, a 24-year-old soldier who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and had been selected for this prestigious position based on his exemplary military record and unwavering discipline. Marcus had done absolutely no research about the Queen's Guard before his trip. He had no idea about their rigorous training, their serious military background, or the strict protocols they followed. In his ignorant mind, they were simply costumed performers put there for tourist entertainment, like the characters at a theme park who were paid to pose for pictures and interact with visitors. He walked up to Guardsman Mitchell with a cocky grin spreading across his face. The morning air was crisp and other tourists were beginning to gather around the palace grounds, but Marcus paid them no attention. In his mind, he was about to become the star of his own show, and everyone else was just background characters in his personal movie. Marcus stopped directly in front of the guard, close enough that any reasonable person would recognize they were invading the soldier's personal space. He raised his phone and started recording a video, planning to capture what he believed would be his moment of triumph. The camera was rolling. His followers would soon see this, and Marcus was about to make what he thought would be the biggest mistake of his trip. The guard remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his breathing steady and controlled. Years of military training had taught him to ignore distractions, to maintain his position regardless of what tourists might do or say. He had dealt with countless visitors who tried to make him laugh, move, or break his concentration, but Guardsman Mitchell had never encountered someone quite like Marcus Thompson. Other tourists began to notice the scene unfolding before them. Some pulled out their own cameras, sensing that something interesting was about to happen. A family from Japan whispered quietly among themselves, while an elderly British couple shook their heads disapprovingly at the young Americans' obvious lack of respect and understanding of the situation he was walking into. Marcus looked around at the growing audience and felt even more confident about his plan. The more people who witnessed his moment of glory, the better. He had no idea that he was about to learn a very painful lesson about respect, protocol, and the serious nature of the British military tradition he was about to mock and disrespect. Marcus cleared his throat loudly and spoke in an exaggerated, commanding voice that he thought sounded important and authoritative. "Soldier, I demand that you give me a proper military salute right now." He pointed his finger at Guardsman Mitchell while keeping his phone camera focused on the guard's face, expecting an immediate response to his ridiculous demand. The guard remained completely motionless, his training kicking in as he maintained his professional composure, despite the tourists' inappropriate behavior. Marcus had no understanding that these guards were real soldiers with real military responsibilities, not entertainment performers hired to amuse visitors. His ignorance was about to become painfully obvious to everyone watching. Growing frustrated by the lack of response, Marcus stepped even closer to the guard, now standing less than 2 feet away from the soldier's position. The morning crowd of tourists had grown larger, with people stopping their own sightseeing to watch this uncomfortable scene unfold. Many of them looked embarrassed for Marcus, while others appeared angry at his disrespectful behavior toward the guard. "Hey, are you deaf or something?" Marcus said loudly, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "I said I want to salute. Don't you know who I am?" He waved his hand in front of the guard's face, trying to get a reaction. Several tourists gasped at his behavior, and a few people started recording the incident with their own phones, though not for the reasons Marcus imagined. An elderly British gentleman standing nearby shook his head and muttered to his wife, "That young man has no idea what he's getting himself into. Someone should warn him before he makes an even bigger fool of himself." But Marcus was too caught up in his own performance to notice the disapproving looks and worried whispers from the people around him. Marcus had always been the type of person who escalated situations when he didn't get his way immediately. Back home, he would raise his voice at restaurant servers, demand to speak to managers when things didn't go exactly as he wanted, and generally behave like someone who believed the world should bend to his will. This personality trait was about to get him into serious trouble in a place where such behavior was not tolerated. "Listen here, buddy," Marcus said, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "I'm an American citizen, and I'm telling you to salute me right now. I've got thousands of followers watching this live, and you're making yourself look like an idiot." He actually believed that his nationality and social media presence gave him some kind of authority over a member of the British military. The guard's jaw tightened slightly, the only sign that he was even aware of Marcus's presence. Guardsman Mitchell had dealt with difficult tourists before, but this level of entitlement and disrespect was testing even his well-trained patience. He remained at his post following protocol, but he was very aware of the escalating situation and the growing crowd of onlookers. Marcus decided to take his performance to the next level. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet, flashing what he thought was an impressive amount of cash. "Look, I'll even pay you for it. Just give me a quick salute for my video and I'll make it worth your while." He actually thought he could bribe a member of the Queen's Guard like they were a street performer. The crowd around them had grown even larger, and many people were now openly expressing their disgust at Marcus's behavior. A group of British university students started booing softly, while a family of tourists from Germany looked absolutely mortified by the scene they were witnessing. Marcus remained completely oblivious to the fact that he was making himself the villain in his own story. What Marcus didn't know was that several palace security officers had been monitoring the situation from nearby positions. They had been trained to handle exactly these types of incidents, and they were already moving into position to intervene if the tourist's behavior continued to escalate. The Queen's Guard were protected by strict protocols, and interfering with them in the way Marcus was doing could have serious legal consequences. As Marcus continued his embarrassing display, he had no idea that his actions were being recorded not just by tourist cameras, but by official security systems as well. His social media stunt was about to become evidence in a situation that would spiral far beyond anything he could have imagined when he first approached the guard with his entitled attitude and complete lack of respect for British military tradition. Growing increasingly frustrated by the guard's complete lack of response to his demands, Marcus made the biggest mistake of his entire trip. He reached out and actually grabbed the sleeve of Guardsman Mitchell's red uniform, tugging on it while shouting, "Are you going to ignore me all day? I'm talking to you." The moment his hand made contact with the soldier's uniform, everything changed. The reaction was immediate and shocking. Guardsman Mitchell's training kicked in instantly, and he responded exactly as he had been taught to handle physical interference. In one swift, fluid motion that demonstrated years of military conditioning, the guard turned toward Marcus with lightning speed and delivered a sharp, controlled shove that sent the entitled tourist stumbling backward several steps. "Do not touch the guard." Guardsman Mitchell's voice boomed across the courtyard with such authority and power that it made everyone within 50 feet freeze in place. His shout was not the voice of a tourist attraction employee, but the commanding roar of a trained soldier who had just been physically assaulted while performing his duties. The sound echoed off the palace walls and silenced every conversation in the immediate area. Marcus stumbled and nearly fell, his expensive camera swinging wildly around his neck as he struggled to regain his balance. His face went completely white with shock and fear as he suddenly realized that he had made a terrible mistake. The confident smirk disappeared from his face, replaced by wide-eyed terror as he understood for the first time that he was dealing with a real soldier, not a costumed entertainer. The crowd of tourists erupted in gasps and excited chatter. Some people applauded the guard's response, while others quickly backed away from the scene, sensing that the situation was about to get much worse for the American tourist. Several visitors started recording more intensively, realizing they were witnessing something that would likely become a viral video. Within seconds of the guard's shout, 3 palace security officers appeared as if from nowhere, moving quickly and purposefully toward Marcus. These were not ordinary security guards, but highly trained professionals whose job was to protect the palace, its grounds, and its personnel from exactly the type of interference Marcus had just committed. They wore dark uniforms and serious expressions that left no doubt about their intentions. "Sir, step away from the guard immediately," ordered the lead security officer, a tall, imposing man with the bearing of someone who had handled countless difficult situations. His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable tone of authority that made it clear this was not a request, but a command that would be enforced regardless of Marcus's cooperation. Marcus tried to stammer out an explanation, his voice shaking with fear and confusion. Wait, I was just trying to get a picture. I didn't mean anything by it. I'm an American tourist, and I thought..." His words trailed off as he realized how pathetic and weak his excuses sounded in the face of the serious situation he had created through his own arrogance and ignorance. "You physically interfered with a member of Her Majesty's Guard while they were performing their duties," the security officer stated matter-of-factly. "This is a serious offense under British law, and you will need to come with us immediately for questioning." The officer's tone made it clear that arguing would only make Marcus's situation worse. Other tourists began pulling out their phones to record what was happening, and Marcus realized with growing horror that his social media stunt had turned into a nightmare that would be broadcast far beyond his small circle of followers. The very fame he had been seeking was about to come in the worst possible way, as the story of an entitled American tourist who assaulted a Queen's Guard spread across the internet. Marcus looked around desperately for support or sympathy from the crowd, but found only disapproving stares and shaking heads. An elderly British woman loudly declared, "Absolutely disgraceful behavior. Young man should be ashamed of himself." Her comment was met with murmurs of agreement from other onlookers who had witnessed his disrespectful conduct from the beginning. The security officers moved closer, and Marcus realized that his expensive London vacation was about to take a very different turn than he had planned. His hands shook as he tried to process the fact that what he had thought would be a harmless prank for social media had turned into a genuine legal incident that could have serious consequences for his future. The lead security officer stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder, guiding him away from the guard post with professional efficiency. "Sir, you need to come with us to the security office where we will discuss this incident and determine appropriate action," he said in a tone that left no room for negotiation or escape. Marcus's legs felt weak as the reality of his situation began to sink in. He had come to London expecting to create content that would impress his followers and boost his ego, but instead he found himself being escorted away by palace security while dozens of tourists recorded his humiliation. His expensive camera bounced against his chest with each nervous step, a painful reminder of the social media fame he had been seeking. As they walked toward the security building, Marcus tried desperately to explain himself, his voice cracking with panic. "Officer, please, I really didn't know I wasn't supposed to touch him. In America, we don't have guards like this, and I thought it was just for show. I swear I wasn't trying to cause any trouble." His words tumbled out in a rush of fear and regret. The security officer remained professionally courteous but unmoved by Marcus's pleas. "Sir, ignorance of protocol and law is not an excuse for physical interference with military personnel. The Queen's Guard are active duty soldiers performing serious security functions, not tourist attractions. This will need to be handled through proper channels." Inside the security office, Marcus found himself in a small, sterile room with white walls and minimal furniture. The atmosphere was serious and intimidating, nothing like the glamorous adventure he had imagined when he first planned his London trip. 2 additional security personnel joined the initial officer, and Marcus realized he was facing a formal investigation into his actions. "Please have a seat," instructed one of the officers, gesturing to a hard metal chair positioned across from a simple desk. Marcus sat down heavily, his confidence completely shattered as he faced the consequences of his entitled behavior. The officers began pulling out paperwork and official forms, making it clear that this was not going to be resolved with a simple apology. "We need to see your identification documents," requested the lead officer, extending his hand expectantly. Marcus fumbled through his wallet with shaking fingers, producing his American passport and driver's license. As he handed over his documents, he realized that his personal information was about to become part of an official incident report that could follow him for years. The officer examined Marcus's documents carefully, making notes on an official form. "Mr. Thompson, you are being detained for questioning regarding interference with military personnel in the performance of their duties. This is a violation of the Public Order Act and could result in criminal charges depending on our investigation and the guard's statement." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he heard the words, criminal charges. He had never been in serious trouble with the law before, having always relied on his family's connections and money to smooth over any problems he encountered. But here, in London, thousands of miles from home, those advantages meant nothing, and he was facing the consequences of his actions alone. "What does that mean exactly?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, what kind of trouble am I in here? I have a flight back to Dallas tomorrow evening, and I really need to get home for work on Monday." He still didn't fully grasp the seriousness of his situation, clinging to the hope that this was all just a misunderstanding that could be quickly resolved. The officer looked at him with a mixture of professional detachment and mild disbelief at his continued lack of understanding. "Mr. Thompson, depending on the outcome of this investigation, you may not be making that flight. Physical assault on military personnel is taken very seriously in the United Kingdom, and the penalties can include significant fines, imprisonment, and deportation." The word imprisonment hit Marcus like a physical blow. His hands began to sweat, and he felt dizzy as he contemplated the possibility of spending time in a British jail. All of his bravado and entitlement evaporated completely, replaced by genuine terror about what he had gotten himself into through his own stupidity and arrogance. Outside the security office, the story of the entitled American tourist was already beginning to spread through social media as witnesses uploaded their videos and photos of the incident. Marcus had no idea that his quest for internet fame was about to be fulfilled in the most humiliating way possible, as his arrest became entertainment for millions of people around the world. While Marcus sat in the security office facing the consequences of his actions, Guardsman Mitchell was giving his official statement about the incident to a senior officer. His account was precise and professional, describing exactly what had happened from his perspective as the victim of Marcus's physical interference. The guard's statement would become a crucial piece of evidence in determining how severely Marcus would be prosecuted. The individual approached my position in an aggressive manner and made repeated demands for me to break protocol, Guardsman Mitchell reported in his crisp military tone. When I maintained my post as required, he became increasingly agitated and eventually grabbed my uniform sleeve while shouting at me. I responded according to training to protect myself and maintain the security of my position. Back in the security office, Marcus was forced to provide a complete account of his actions, and with each question, he realized how terrible his behavior had been. The officers methodically documented every detail of his conduct, from his initial demands for a salute to his final physical contact with the guard. Each admission made his situation worse and highlighted his complete lack of respect for British military tradition. "Mr. Thompson, we've reviewed the security camera footage of the incident, and your account matches what we observed," stated the lead investigator. "However, the video clearly shows that you initiated physical contact with the guard after being repeatedly warned by your own behavior that such contact was inappropriate. This elevates the incident beyond a simple misunderstanding. Marcus's phone had been confiscated during the investigation, but he had no idea that his own social media accounts were exploding with activity. Videos of his confrontation with the guard had been shared thousands of times across various platforms, with comments ranging from mockery of his entitled behavior to serious discussions about respect for military personnel and cultural sensitivity while traveling abroad. The hashtag, Queen's Guard Tourist, had begun trending on social media, with people sharing the videos alongside commentary about Marcus's behavior. Many viewers expressed outrage at his disrespectful conduct, while others used the incident as an example of why Americans had a poor reputation as tourists in other countries. Marcus had achieved the viral fame he wanted, but in the worst possible way. "We need to discuss your options at this point," the security officer continued, shuffling through the paperwork that had accumulated during the investigation. "Given the seriousness of physically interfering with military personnel, we are required to forward this matter to the Metropolitan Police for potential criminal prosecution. However, there may be alternative resolutions available depending on your cooperation and willingness to accept responsibility." Marcus felt a glimmer of hope at the mention of alternatives, though he was still too frightened to think clearly about what any of this meant for his future. "What kind of alternatives?" he asked desperately, grasping at any possibility that might get him out of this nightmare he had created for himself through his own arrogance and stupidity. "If you are willing to formally apologize to the Guard, pay a substantial fine to cover the cost of this investigation and the disruption you caused, and agree to certain conditions regarding your remaining time in the United Kingdom, the prosecution may agree to a caution rather than formal charges," the officer explained. However, this would still result in a permanent record of this incident. The mention of a permanent record sent another wave of panic through Marcus as he realized that this mistake could affect his future employment, travel opportunities, and personal reputation for years to come. He thought about his job at his father's company, his social circle back in Dallas, and how this story would follow him for the rest of his life. "I'll do whatever you want," Marcus said quickly, his voice desperate and pleading. "I'll apologize, pay whatever fine you think is appropriate, and follow any conditions you set. I just want to go home and put this whole thing behind me. I never meant for any of this to happen, and I'm truly sorry for my behavior." The officer nodded but remained serious. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to understand that this apology process is not simply a formality. You will need to demonstrate genuine understanding of why your behavior was wrong and show real respect for the Guard you assaulted. If your apology is perceived as insincere or self-serving, the offer of alternative resolution will be withdrawn immediately." As Marcus sat there contemplating the apology he would have to make, he had no idea that his story was becoming international news, with media outlets around the world picking up the video of his encounter with the Queen's Guard as an example of tourist behavior gone wrong. 2 hours later, Marcus found himself standing once again in front of Guardsman Mitchell, but this time the circumstances were completely different. Gone was his cocky confidence and entitled attitude, replaced by genuine shame and humiliation as he prepared to formally apologize for his inexcusable behavior. Security officers flanked him on both sides, ensuring that this encounter would proceed according to strict protocol. "Guardsman Mitchell," Marcus began, his voice shaking with nervousness and genuine remorse, "I want to sincerely apologize for my completely inappropriate behavior earlier today. I showed tremendous disrespect for you, your position, and the important duties you perform. I had no right to make demands of you, to invade your personal space, or especially to put my hands on your uniform." The guard maintained his professional composure, but Marcus could see in his eyes that he was listening carefully to every word of the apology. Guardsman Mitchell had accepted the option to hear Marcus's formal apology, rather than proceeding directly to criminal prosecution, but his willingness to consider alternative resolution did not mean he was taking the incident lightly. "I realize now that you are not a tourist attraction or entertainment, but a real soldier performing serious military duties," Marcus continued, the words feeling heavy and important as he spoke them. "My behavior was that of an ignorant, entitled person who had no understanding or respect for British military tradition. I am deeply ashamed of my actions and the embarrassment I caused both to you and to my own country." Marcus's voice cracked with emotion as he realized the full weight of his mistakes. The fine he would have to pay was substantial enough to wipe out most of his savings, but the financial cost was nothing compared to the damage to his reputation and self-respect. The videos of his behavior had already been seen by hundreds of thousands of people, and the story was being covered by news outlets both in Britain and back home in America. "I want you to know that this experience has taught me a lesson I will never forget," Marcus said, looking directly at the guard with tear-filled eyes. I will never again treat anyone with such disrespect, especially those who serve their country in uniform. I am truly deeply sorry for my actions, and I understand if you cannot forgive me for what I did. Guardsman Mitchell nodded slightly, acknowledging the apology without breaking his professional demeanor. The security officers made notes of Marcus's statement, which would become part of the official record of the incident. The guard's acceptance of the apology would allow Marcus to avoid criminal charges, but the consequences of his behavior would follow him for much longer than his remaining time in London. As Marcus was escorted away from the palace grounds for the final time, he felt the weight of his shame and regret settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. His phone had been returned to him and the notifications were overwhelming. Thousands of comments, messages, and tags as his story spread across the internet like wildfire. His quest for social media fame had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but in the most humiliating way possible. The flight home to Dallas was the longest journey of Marcus's life. As he sat in his economy seat, surrounded by strangers who might recognize him from the viral videos, he had plenty of time to think about how dramatically his life had changed in just a few hours. His arrogance and entitlement had cost him thousands of dollars, damaged his reputation permanently, and taught him a painful lesson about respect and humility. When Marcus finally arrived home, he discovered that his story had made local news in Dallas as well. His co-workers had seen the videos, his friends were asking questions, and even his parents were disappointed and embarrassed by his behavior. The social media fame he had craved became a source of constant humiliation, as people recognized him as that guy who tried to make the Queen's Guard salute him. Months later, Marcus would look back on his encounter with Guardsman Mitchell as the moment his life changed completely. The experience forced him to confront his entitled attitude and lack of respect for others, beginning a long process of personal growth and self-reflection. He eventually found a new job outside his father's company, worked to rebuild his reputation through volunteer work and genuine community service, and became an advocate for respectful tourism and cultural sensitivity. The lesson Marcus learned that day in London was simple but profound. Respect must be earned through behavior and character, not demanded through entitlement and arrogance. His instant regret at demanding a salute from the Queen's Guard became the foundation for becoming a better person, though the humiliation of his viral fame would serve as a permanent reminder of the consequences of his actions.